Wide receiver play this NFL season has been absolutely nuts to start the year. Players have been exceeding my expectations, been booming left and right and putting up monster production numbers. And in this video, I'll be talking about 5 of those players that have absolutely soared up my rankings here after the first 2 weeks of the year, proving to me things that either I didn't think was possible, I wasn't sure if it was sustainable or not. All kinds of great stuff. We'll be breaking all of that down and more in today's episode, talking through why I've gained increased optimism on these 5 wide receivers for today's video and a whole bunch more. So if you're new around here, smash that like button, click the subscribe button, turn the bell on so you can race on in here and ask me your fantasy questions right away every single day when I drop a new video. And let's get started. All right, as I did in the running backs episode, which is also being posted today, I'm going to set some parameters here and just kind of talk through some things for today's episode. So first and foremost, of course, Jaylen Waddle is our first player here. Had an awesome week here in week 2. Played pretty well on limited snaps in week 1. The wide receiver 5 number you see below his name here is his current status based off of ESPN half PPR scoring. So I basically just took those numbers, pulled them out of the database, and plugged it into here just to give you kind of a reference point of where they're at this point in time. Again, they're kind of arbitrary. They're going to change. You're going to see players move up and down due to health and other issues. That number accounts for their total production and therefore their averages going forward for the season. So actually not their averages. This is not fantasy points per game. This is total fantasy scoring at the wide receiver 5 position. So Jaylen Waddle comes in first here, the first guy that is definitely moving up my rankings. This is a player that had himself one heck of a game in week 2. There's no getting around it. The things that he did to that Baltimore Ravens secondary were unholy, and everyone in that Ravens secondary should be, absolutely shamed upon and looked down upon here moving forward into week 3, because those guys absolutely blew it, gave up the game for the Ravens, absolutely allowed Tua and this Dolphins pass-catching offense to just run rampant on them and do basically whatever they wanted to. I think Tyreek Hill was it back-to-back plays from scrimmage that he was able to just break loose and score a huge touchdown over the top. These guys were just running past people. It's really embarrassing for that Ravens secondary. Thank God I'm not a Ravens fan. Otherwise, I probably would have broke my TV. That was a frustrating game, I imagine. So there's actually some video on like NFL Memes IG, if you guys follow them on Instagram, of some guy, I've seen him before, I forget his name though, that was just shrieking about the game. You probably have no idea what I'm talking about, so we'll leave that be. But basically, the important thing to talk about here is Jaylen Waddle and the things he did in that contest. And while I'm still not ready to put him in my elite class of fantasy football wide receivers for this season, your Justin Jeffersons, Cooper Kupps, your Devontae Adams, Stephon Diggses of the world, Waddle has done something that in the preseason draft season for fantasy football here, I didn't think he could do. And it looks like he's going to, barring health, finish as a top 12 fantasy football wide receiver. I wasn't sold on the idea or the fact that Tua Tagovailoa could support 2 top 12 wide receiver options, especially given my assumption that Tyreek Hill would finish somewhere between that 5 to 7 range with tremendous upside in his own right. So it looks like that's false and, kind of been proven irrelevant here. It's only been 2 weeks. I still have some concerns about Jaylen Waddle here. But if he continues to put up ceiling numbers like this, look at a guy like Mike Williams last year, who was all or nothing in a given week in, week out basis and finished as a top 12 option. So even if my concerns about Jaylen Waddle come true here, and that being that I still firmly believe Tyreek Hill is the alpha wide receiver 1 for this offense, it looks like Jaylen Waddle can be supported in that top 12 group as well. And due to his talent and playmaking ability, both after the catch and just simply getting downfield and making explosive plays happen, he could do a whole lot more than just that top 12 marker. He could potentially get himself in the top 8 range if he continues doing this type of thing on a consistent basis. But that's where kind of my concern lies. You're not going to be trailing, and have to outscore a team 28-3 in many fourth quarters this year. You're not really going to find yourself in situations where I think that, the Dolphins seem like a pretty put together organization right now, a team that's trending in the right direction. I don't think these game scripts are going to be playing out a whole ton here. So I do think this week could get into a bit of a shootout against Buffalo. We'll see how their secondary fares. I imagine better than the Ravens did last week, just on a fundamental basis of being a more solid group on the back end. They don't have the most talent in the world, but they are pretty buttoned up. They've got a good pass rush in Von Miller and Greg Rousseau and some of those other guys up front. So Waddle, for me, again, he has definitely asserted himself as a top 12 wide receiver for this season. I was wrong about that, but again, my concerns, he's only got 20, I shouldn't say only, he has 12 targets on the season, which if you do the math, averages out to 12 per game over 24 total on 2 weeks. 19 of those came this past week, though. I do understand the premise, though, that he was dealing with an injury coming into week 1 and only played 67% of snaps. So Jaylen Waddle, take it or leave it. He's moving up the rankings here. Amon-Ra St. Brown, one of the other just phenomenal early season. I don't even want to call him a breakout. I feel like that's just kind of doing what he did to end last year in Injustice, but he's showing us he can do it all over again, and he's not done. And man, do I love me some slot receivers in the National Football League. These guys are my favorites. They don't have to be the best athletes. They don't have to be just these freaky, twitchy players. They just got to be good at football. And that's what these players are. They're a bit slower, but their routes are just so awesome to watch. They're the players that, it's like the Cooper Kupps of the world. A guy who ran, 4.62 40-yard dash. Even a Devontae Adams, who does a whole lot of his damage from the slot, ran in the 4.6s, I believe, for his 40 time. Might have been a 4.59 or something like that. But man, I love some good slot receiver play. Amon-Ra St. Brown has been killing it. Looks like he is on the cusp of being an elite fantasy football wide receiver. He is the wide receiver 3 right now. Has had 12 targets respectively in each of his 2 games this season. And here's an awesome stat. It's not really, it is a stat, but it's nothing really out of the box here. Did you know Jared Goff is the fantasy quarterback 9 right now? That is mind-boggling to me. He's averaging 20 fantasy points per game based on traditional quarterback scoring. He's getting the job done. This Detroit offense is cooking. They're moving the football. I believe they're top 5 in rushing right now. And DeAndre Swift might be the RB3 if I'm not mistaken. So they've got some things going for them here. St. Brown's not the only man on the ship here. He's producing ththese numbers with other legit dudes doing work for this team. So I couldn't be happier for him. Again, it's like an art form. It makes me so excited to watch this type of stuff, to break down film of these players. You just fall in love with their games and the stuff they're able to do. So Amon-Ra St. Brown here, definitely in my top 12 wide receiver group as well right now, especially the higher PPR format you've got going there, the higher premium per reception. You're loving this guy in your lineups. Drake London, our early season rookie breakout candidate from draft season. I was talking about, they need him right away to do things for their offense, and he didn't really waste any time. He's gotten 7 or more targets in both games, and like I said, he was a prime candidate to break out early. He was the first receiver taken off the board in the 2022 draft, the 8th overall pick. And this offense just needs playmakers. We didn't expect it to take him long at all to get on the field and see, alpha targets for this team. Got 12 of them this past week against the Rams, scored a touchdown, proved he can beat solid coverage here. Not that Jalen Ramsey was shadowing him or anything, but this is the defending Super Bowl champions, and they were able to come back for what that is worth. So for a guy this big that's able to get out in space and be a tough tackle, I love what he represents as a threat to the defense. We saw Arthur Smith. One of the most interesting things I saw, and it's just kind of a microcosm of how this Falcons dynamic has played out so far this season, is that on the goal line, rather than throwing it to their 6'6" tight end, Kyle Pitts, they ran like a scoop route. So they were like stacked, if that makes sense. That's the football terminology. They were in a stacked formation, if my memory serves me correctly. That's where I'm pulling this from. But they were on the left side of the field, stack formation, and Kyle Pitts runs down and under to block Drake London's defender to get a quick slant on the goal line for a touchdown. So like I said, instead of Arthur Smith calling a play to get Kyle Pitts, the huge athlete, Drake London's a big guy too. I think he's 6'4", 6'5". Instead of using that body, they used that body to clear space for Drake London to score. So frustration for Kyle Pitts owners. I hope to God he gets involved, because he's a better athlete than Drake London is, plain and simple. But they've gotten him the football early and often, and it looks like he's in for quite the season here. And he's just a really polished all-around player. This guy is the real deal for the Falcons offense. Garrett Wilson, my guy here, that I attached to my hip for 2022 Dynasty Fantasy Football. Garrett Wilson was my wide receiver 1 out of the 2022 draft class. That's something that I, once I cut on the tape, I set that in stone and I stuck to it here. And it's looking like, it's too early to say I was right, but I definitely wasn't wrong, if that makes sense, for picking him over a guy like Drake London. Now, it's been 2 weeks. Garrett Wilson's the wide receiver 9 right now. Drake London's the wide receiver 16. And, the Jets will have a quarterback transition here within the next couple of weeks. It looks like Zach Wilson, the report I read, is that he is in line to start here in week 4. But hopefully he gets himself a Tua situation where between him, Elijah Moore, a guy, they just drafted Breece Hall. They've got Michael Carter. They've got some tight ends that they've got, Tyler Conklin, CJ Uzoma. They've got just an absolute disastrous tight end room. And I mean that in a good way, if that makes sense, which it totally didn't. But I was going to say a different phrase that was very explicit, but I figured I'd forget about it and wouldn't bleep it out. So I apologize for that, just word diarrhea there. But Garrett Wilson looks phenomenal here. The reason I had him as my top wide receiver coming from that draft class is I believe he had the best combination of athleticism and pure elite next level route running. The goal line fade that he ran for a touchdown, it was a 1-yard touchdown. But the moves that he put on that Browns defender were absurd. He perfectly used his leverage, chopped his feet, gave him a head fake, boom, to the corner, and he looked like he just floated through the air, went up and snatched that touchdown. The other touchdown was a game winner, a go-ahead from Joe Flacco, a veteran quarterback who has been clearly preferring him over Elijah Moore, the second-year player. So 8 or more targets in both games for Garrett Wilson. I actually kind of went a hot route here and drafted him. I had the choice. Both him and Drake London were on the board. In one of my dynasty leagues, I took Garrett Wilson. And for now, I'm not regretting that decision. He looks the part. Had one of the best 40s in the wide receiver class this season. And I think, this is a lofty expectation, but his tape, his movement in space, his body control reminded me so much of kind of a skinnier Devontae Adams. So I had to have him. Absolutely love him here. And he's broken out much sooner than I expected him to. So hopefully Zach Wilson taking the reins at quarterback here for the Jets doesn't really screw things up too much. But for a guy who has had 14 targets, 8 receptions, 102 yards, and 2 receiving touchdowns this past week against Cleveland, I'm liking what I'm seeing going forward. Maybe he can develop into an elite ceiling flex play for your teams here. And like I said, phenomenal at just football. He's such a good receiver. And then Curtis Samuel here, the current wide receiver 11, 20 total targets through 2 games, has really impressed me, has really been a dynamic playmaker for this Commanders offense. He has been the leading target shareholder for this Washington offense in back-to-back weeks. That's worth noting because Carson Wentz is capable of producing legitimate wide receiver lineup weeks here. Curtis has become a valuable flex role player for teams in the blink of an eye. From a guy that was undrafted in a waiver wire pickup in a lot of smaller teams, he's now maybe someone you're questioning in your lineup every week. So the matchup this week is the Philadelphia Eagles. I'm really interested to see if the trend continues with him continually racking up targets and receptions. He's got a touchdown in both games, but I took those touchdowns away in half PPR scoring, and he still scored 9 points based off of his other reception and yardage production numbers. So love what I'm seeing. Curtis Samuel's an awesome guy and was severely underrated in draft season this year. Definitely not on par with some of the other players, especially at the top of the list for today's video, but Curtis Samuel did some major work. So to recap, Jaylen Waddle, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Drake London, Garrett Wilson, and Curtis Samuel here are the guys at the wide receiver position moving up my rest of season rankings. Of course, like I said a couple times, you'll see that video sometime, probably around this time next week, and I'll dive into all that stuff. I might make it a tiers list to make things a little bit more digestible for you guys. So I just think it's, visually more easy to represent that than just kind of progressing through this sort of a display here. So if you got thoughts on that, of course, let me know in the comment section below. Let me know your fantasy questions. Of course, if you're new around here and haven't subscribed yet, make sure you do that. We're trying to grow the community here, help out as many fantasy players as possible, and of course, interact with as many of you as well as I possibly can. So thank you guys so much. Thanks for your time today. I appreciate you guys. Check out the running back segment if you haven't already in our Week 3 Fantasy Football playlist, and I'll see you there. Peace out.